They say your parents are supposed to protect you, that the very idea of a mother or father is wrapped in safety, a roof over your head, a place where you don't have to look over your shoulder. But that's not always true. My name is Ruth Ann Collins. I'm 86 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm going to tell you something I was never supposed to say. Something I've carried in my bones like a buried splinter. You can't always pull it out, but you learn to live with it. I live alone now, in a small town outside of Asheville, North Carolina. My porch creaks when the wind blows. The kettle whistles just a little louder than it used to. And I keep a photograph of a girl I used to be, hidden in a drawer I rarely open. They say it helps to talk. That telling your story can lift the weight from your chest. But this isn't the kind of story you tell at church or over coffee. This is the kind you swallow, year after year, because no one wants to believe a father could do what mine did. I was 16, just 16 when he sold me. He didn't even look ashamed. I remember that part the most. His face was calm, like he was trading a cow, or a truck, or a piece of land, like I was just something he had. And now he didn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before all that, I was just a girl who thought God lived in the kitchen light when Mama sang. I believed people only did bad things because they were desperate, not evil. I thought being quiet, being good would keep you safe, that if you didn't make noise, no one would hurt you. I know better now. The truth is, silence doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it buries you. I've never spoken these words out loud, not to my daughter, not to my pastor, not even to the man I later came to love. I built my life on silence, on smiling through the pain, on stitching together stories that left out all the sharp edges. But I'm old now, and I don't want to die with this story inside me. If you're hearing my voice, if you're watching this, please tell me in the comments where you're from. I just want to know if anyone is out there. If someone else understands what it means to be broken young and still somehow grow up around the cracks. There's no revenge in my voice, no bitterness, just truth. This is not a fairy tale. This is not justice served. This is not the kind of story where the bad man goes to jail and the girl is saved in time. No one saved me, but I saved myself, eventually. And if that's all I leave behind in this world, the proof that someone like me could live, survive, and speak, then maybe it's enough. I'm going to take you back now, back to the dirt road where I grew up, back to a house that smelled like tobacco and old wood, to the last time I believed my daddy loved me, to the days before I realized my body was something that could be traded, something with a price. We'll walk through it together, not because it's easy, but because I've learned the only way to not be haunted by the past is to stop running from it. I'll begin with my childhood, where the seeds were planted, where the danger took root. But before I do, let me say this again. If this story is finding you, wherever you are, leave me a comment. Tell me you heard me. Tell me I'm not alone. Please. I was born in 1939 in a place you've probably never heard of, Pine Hollow, Kentucky. Back then, it wasn't much more than a few dirt roads, a general store, and a church that doubled as a schoolhouse. Folks worked hard, and they didn't ask questions they didn't want the answers to. We lived in a wooden house with peeling paint, sagging steps, and a wood stove that smoked more than it warmed. My mother, Ida May, was a soft-spoken woman with hands like parchment and eyes always cast down. She used to hum while she worked, gospel tunes mostly. And I believed that if I closed my eyes and listened close enough, I could float out of my body and disappear into her song. I didn't know we were poor, not really. I just knew we had less than most, and that my father's moods were heavier than his footsteps. His name was Elbert, a name that still tastes bitter in my mouth. He worked at the sawmill on the edge of town, came home smelling like sweat and sawdust, and believed in three things: God, obedience, and silence. Especially from women. He had a voice that cracked like a whip. I never once heard him say, "I love you," but I heard, "Don't make me say it again," more times than I can count. I was the third of 5 children, and the quietest. My older brother Thomas ran off to the army when he turned 17. My sister Beth married young, mostly to escape. The 2 younger ones, Earl and Lottie, were too small to understand the way our father's shadow swallowed the room the second he walked in. When I was little, I thought I was lucky. Daddy never raised a hand to me, not like he did with my brothers. He'd even bring me candy sometimes, a lemon drop wrapped in wax paper, left on the table like a secret. And when I asked Mama about it once, she just looked away and said, "Best not to ask, baby. Just say thank you." So I did. I said thank you. I smiled. I sat still. That's what good girls did. I helped Mama hang the laundry, shell the peas, scrub the floors. I knew how to make biscuits before I knew how to read. I thought if I was useful, invisible, maybe I could keep the peace. I didn't know then what I was really doing, training myself to disappear. The first time I noticed something that didn't feel right, I was about 9. Daddy came home late one night after we were all supposed to be asleep. I heard his boots on the floorboards, slow and heavy. And then I heard my mother's voice, tight and trembling. "No, Albert," she whispered. "She's just a child." I froze. My heart started hammering in my chest. I didn't know what they were talking about. Not then. But I knew shame when I heard it. I knew fear. The next morning, Mama had a bruise on her cheekbone, and she wouldn't look me in the eye. From that moment on, I started paying attention to the way Daddy's eyes lingered when I bent to pick something up, to the way he'd touch my hair and say I was growing up fast, to how Mama started sending me to bed early when he'd been drinking. Still, nothing ever happened. Not yet. But the air changed. It thickened. I began to walk around my own house like it was made of glass. Every creak of a floorboard made my skin prickle. Every silence between Mama and Daddy felt like a warning. And yet, outside our home, we looked like any other family. We went to church every Sunday. Mama made pies for the bake sale. Daddy shook hands with the preacher and bowed his head during grace. People said we were a God-fearing family. That phrase used to make me laugh in my head, because yes, we feared. But it wasn't God. I never told anyone. Who would I tell? In Pine Hollow, girls didn't have voices. We were taught to nod, to pray, and to endure. If something felt wrong, it was your job to bear it, not to name it. So I stayed quiet. I buried the unease deep inside me. I focused on school, on chores, on the stars I could see from my attic window at night. I started writing things down in a little blue notebook I kept hidden under a floorboard. Just thoughts, dreams, pieces of myself I wasn't ready to say out loud. Looking back, that notebook might have saved my life. It was the first place I ever told the truth. But truth, like weeds, finds a way to push through the cracks. And mine, the truth about who my father really was and what he was planning for me, was growing, silently, beneath the surface of my life. It wouldn't stay hidden for long. When I turned 11, I stopped sitting on my daddy's lap, not because anyone told me to, just because something inside me began to twist when he pulled me too close. His hand would linger just a little too long. His smile would stretch too wide, too slow. He wasn't rough. That was the strange part. He was tender, too tender. There's a kind of fear that doesn't come with yelling or bruises. It comes wrapped in quiet moments, the ones that look innocent on the outside, but rot your stomach when you replay them later. One night, when Mama was in bed with a headache, Daddy told me to sit with him on the porch. He handed me a root beer and said, "You're looking more like a woman every day, Ruthie." I remember the way he said it. Not proud, not fatherly, possessive. My hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped the bottle. I told him I was tired and ran to my room. He didn't stop me. But from that night on, I stopped feeling safe in my own skin. I tried telling Mama. In small ways. I didn't have the words for what I was feeling, not back then. I just said, "Daddy makes me feel weird sometimes." She was hanging laundry and she stopped, just for a second. Her eyes scanned the yard to make sure no one was listening, and then she turned to me and said quietly, "Ruthie, you be careful what you say. People will think you're trying to ruin your own daddy's name." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just nodded. That's what I always did. And from that day on, Mama started keeping me busy, gave me more chores, sent me with Beth to the market, even told the school I wasn't feeling well once just to keep me home when Daddy's moods were bad. I think she was trying to protect me, in her own way. But she never said anything to him. Not once. I don't think she dared. That's the thing no one tells you about families like mine. It's not that people don't know, it's that they pretend not to. Because pretending is easier than opening the door to all that darkness. By the time I was 12, I had perfected the art of avoiding him. I knew the creaks in the floorboards. I knew to make noise when I came into a room so he'd hear me coming. I knew never to be alone with him for more than a minute. And I knew not to smile too much, because compliments from him always came with something in his eyes I didn't like. At 13, he started locking the door when Mama went to town, said it was for safety, said he didn't want no one bothering us. But I knew better. I'd sit in my room, back against the door, my little notebook open in my lap, and I'd write prayers. Not to God exactly, just to anyone, to something bigger than me. Please don't let him open the door. Please let Mama come home early. Please make me invisible. There were close calls. Times he'd knock on my door, soft and slow, and say, "Ruthie, come on out now. Let's talk a bit." I'd pretend to be asleep, or sick, or deep in homework. Anything to keep the door shut. I don't think I ever really relaxed during those years. My shoulders were always tight, my breath always shallow. I learned to live in a constant state of readiness, like prey. At school, I smiled. I got good grades. I was quiet. Teachers liked me, but no one really saw me until Mr. Aldridge. He was my 7th grade teacher, kind, soft-spoken, with warm eyes. One day, he asked me to stay after class. My heart jumped. I thought I was in trouble, but all he said was, "Are you all right, Ruth? You seem heavy lately, like you're carrying something too big for you." I wanted so badly to tell him, but the words wouldn't come. I was too afraid, not just of what Daddy would do, but of what might happen if someone believed me. What if they came to the house? What if they made things worse? So I just smiled and said, "I'm fine, sir. Just tired is all." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Well, if you ever want to talk, my door's open." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in years. But kindness wasn't enough to stop what was coming. Because while I was busy hiding, Daddy was making plans. And I didn't know it then. But he'd already started talking to a man from the next county over. A man who had money and no wife. A man who'd seen me once at church and asked if I was spoken for. A deal was struck, behind closed doors, for cash, for land, for favors. I still don't know the full details. All I know is that one night, Daddy came into the kitchen and said, "You're going to be married soon, Ruth. He's a good man, better than you deserve." And just like that, my world cracked in half. I didn't understand what was happening at first. "Married?" I repeated, as if I'd misheard him. Daddy didn't even look up from his plate. "He's 38, got a farm, 3 mules, and no debts. You'll be taken care of." I was 14. 14. I remember standing there, dish towel in my hand, the basin still filled with soap suds. My stomach turned. I felt the floor shift under me, like the whole house was tilting, but no one else noticed. Mama didn't say a word. Her eyes stayed locked on her food. Her fingers trembled around her fork. I wanted her to speak, to stand up, to scream, but all she did was whisper, "It's what's best." Best for who? That night I cried so hard into my pillow I thought I might choke. My body shook and my thoughts ran wild. What did this man look like? What would he do to me? Why was no one stopping it? In the morning, I asked Daddy if I could stay in school. He laughed. "School? That ain't gonna feed your babies." My chest collapsed. Babies? I didn't even know what he meant fully. Not then. I was a child. Still playing jacks with Lottie when no one was watching. Still daydreaming about living in a big city and owning a bookstore. I didn't eat for 3 days. The man came to visit one Sunday. I remember every second. His name was Harold Cotter. He was tall with a face like wet clay, pale, expressionless. He shook my hand like he was buying livestock, didn't smile, just nodded and said, "She'll do fine. She'll do fine." I was in the room, and somehow I was invisible. He brought whiskey for Daddy, a sack of flour for Mama, and left a small envelope on the table. I never saw what was inside, but after he left, Daddy counted it behind closed doors and whistled low. That night, I tried to run. I made it as far as the edge of the woods before my father caught me. He didn't hit me. He didn't yell. He knelt down, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You think the world's going to be kind to a girl like you? You've got no place out there. You don't belong to yourself no more. You're his now." And with that, he picked me up by the arm and dragged me back. I didn't speak for days, not even to Mama. I started to unravel. My mind floated above my body most days. I'd stare at the wall and feel nothing. No tears left, just this dull, empty hum inside me. Mama brought me food, sat it beside me. Sometimes she'd brush my hair and say, "This won't last forever, just survive it." But I didn't want to survive. I wanted to disappear. The wedding was set for 2 months later. A small ceremony. No dress, just a clean skirt and blouse. No music, no guests aside from Harold, Daddy, and a preacher who didn't ask questions. The night before, I sat by the window and watched the stars. I prayed to every single one of them, begged for a miracle, a storm, a fire, anything to stop what was coming. Nothing happened. On the morning of the wedding, I vomited twice. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mama gave me a handkerchief with lavender stitched into the corner and said, "You be strong now, Ruthie. You be brave." Brave. What did brave mean in a world like this? The ceremony was over in minutes. The kiss was cold. And just like that, I wasn't Ruth Ann Collins anymore. I was Ruth Cotter, wife of a stranger. Property, passed from one man to another. Harold took me to his house, an hour's drive away. A small, crumbling farmhouse surrounded by fields that stretched on forever. No neighbors close by, no phone, just silence. That first night, I locked the bedroom door and cried until morning. When he knocked, I pretended to be sick. But the next night, the door didn't have a lock anymore. I won't describe what happened after that, not because I don't remember. I remember every second. The smell of whiskey on his breath, the weight of him, the way he didn't look me in the eye. But because some things, even now, I still can't say out loud. I was 16 by then. 2 years of silence. 2 years of existing in a body I no longer felt belonged to me. No one came for me. No one checked in. And by the time I missed my first period, I realized there was something inside me. Something growing. A baby. I was going to have a child by a man I barely knew. A man who bought me. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I knew I had to find a way out. Not for me, for the child. Because I refused to let another life grow up in chains. After I found out I was pregnant, the days blurred into one another. I didn't tell Harold right away. I didn't even tell myself, not in words. I just knew. My body was changing. My stomach turned at the smell of bacon. My chest ached. I cried at nothing and everything. He didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't care. Most nights, he came home drunk. Some nights, he didn't come home at all. And when he did, I never knew what version of him would walk through the door. The silent one, the rough one, or the one who muttered apologies into the dark that meant nothing. I began to live in pieces. Part of me existed in that house. Scrubbing floors, making stew, folding clothes. Another part of me hovered somewhere far away, a place in my mind where there was no Harold, no Daddy, no darkness. Just a tree, a big oak tree by a river, and me, Sitting under it with a book in my lap, the wind in my hair, that place became my escape, my refuge. Dissociation, they call it now. But back then, I just thought I was going crazy. I stopped feeling pain when he hit me, stopped reacting when he raised his voice. I became numb, a ghost in my own skin. The baby was the only thing that tethered me to reality. A heartbeat inside me I couldn't hear yet, but I believed in it. It gave me something Harold couldn't take. I started talking to it, softly when I was alone. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, place my hands on my belly, and whisper, "You're not going to stay here. I'll find a way. I'll get us out. I swear it." But I didn't know how. I had no money, no transportation, no one to call. Harold didn't let me out much, said women belonged in the home. Once a week, he'd let me walk to the general store down the road, a dusty little shack run by an old widow named Mrs. Carter. She had kind eyes. I started saving pennies from grocery change and hiding them in the hem of my coat. Every cent mattered, but money wasn't my only obstacle. I didn't know where I would go. What if they found me and brought me back? What if the world outside was worse than the one I was in? I had no papers, no birth certificate. No one knew I existed outside that farm. One night, Harold came home angrier than usual. He'd lost money gambling, and the bottle he brought with him was nearly empty before he crossed the porch. He slammed the door and shouted my name. I knew what was coming. When he reached me, I was already in the corner, curled tight, silent. He hit me across the face, hard, then again and again. I blacked out. When I came to, I was on the floor, blood trickling from my lip and my blouse torn. My head throbbed and my belly cramped. And I was scared, not just for me, but for the baby. I stayed in bed for 3 days. He didn't even check on me. I think he knew what he'd done but didn't care. That was the breaking point. I stopped praying for rescue. I started planning for escape. The following week, I went to Mrs. Carter's shop. My lip was still swollen. She looked at me for a long time and said gently, "If you ever need a place to rest, there's a shed out back. Door don't lock, but it's warm." That sentence saved my life. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry, but she saw me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone cared whether I lived or died. I started hiding extra food, stashing cloth diapers in a flour sack, little things, quiet things. I stitched the hem of my coat thicker to hide more change, and I waited for the right night, waited for Harold to leave, waited for the moon to rise high enough that I could see the road by its light. Every heartbeat reminded me why I had to try. I was 16, pregnant, alone, terrified, but I wasn't helpless, not anymore. I had survived the unthinkable. Now I would survive the escape. The night it all changed was colder than most. There was a bitter wind, the kind that stung your cheeks and made the windows groan. Harold had left early that morning, muttering something about a card game and bad debts. I hadn't seen him since, and I prayed I wouldn't, not until I was gone. I was 6 months pregnant. The baby had started kicking. Just little flutters at first, but then full, strong jabs, like it was telling me, "I'm here, keep going." That kick gave me strength I didn't know I had. I had gathered everything I needed, a small bundle of food, a pair of Harold's wool socks I'd stolen, a few coins sewn into my lining, and a crumpled piece of paper with an address written on it. A place I'd heard about from Mrs. Carter, a shelter, 3 towns over. She never said much, but she slipped me the address one day with a loaf of bread and whispered, "If you can make it there, they won't turn you away." I waited until nightfall, lit no lamps, sat in the dark, my hand on my belly, listening to the house creak. And then, headlights. My blood went cold. Harold was back. I ducked into the pantry and waited. He staggered in, cursing, slammed the door, kicked something across the floor. Then silence, but not the peaceful kind, the kind that means something's about to happen. Then I heard it. Voices, not just his, another man's, and then a third. I peeked through the crack in the pantry door and saw them. 3 men sitting at the table, drunk, laughing. Harold had brought company. I watched as he pointed toward the bedroom and said something that made them all laugh louder. I couldn't hear it all, but I caught fragments. "She's young, but she'll do. Pregnant, but tight. Consider it part of the payment." My knees buckled. I knew that look in their eyes. I'd seen it before and on Harold. Now I saw it on 3 faces. That's when I understood. He wasn't just going to keep me locked away. He was going to sell me again, piece by piece, to whoever paid enough. My father had sold me once. Now my husband, if I could even call him that, was doing it too. I'd thought I had more time, that I could plan, escape slowly, quietly. But time was gone. This was it. I had to go, that night. I crept through the back of the house, heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. My hands trembled as I opened the back door. The wind slapped my face like a warning, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran through fields of frozen corn stalks, through mud and frost and thorns that tore at my coat. My breath caught in my throat. My legs burned. But I kept going. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the woods. Then I vomited, from fear, from exhaustion, from the weight of it all. I leaned against a tree and sobbed, but only for a moment. I couldn't afford grief. Not yet. I had miles to go before morning. Somewhere behind me, Harold's truck roared to life. I ducked into the trees and kept moving. Every step felt like a prayer. Every crack of a twig made me freeze, but somehow I made it. After hours of walking, I found the shed behind Mrs. Carter's store. Just like she said, it was unlocked, small, cold, but safe. I curled up inside, pulled my coat over my belly, and wept. Not just from fear, but from the realization that there was no going back, no home, no family, no past. That part of my life was gone. The girl I'd been had been traded, betrayed, discarded. But I was still here, bruised, but not broken, alive, and carrying life. I woke up in that shed the next morning with my face pressed against splintered wood and my hands curled around my belly. My body ached. My feet were raw and blistered, and I was soaked from the waist down in blood. For a second, I thought I was losing the baby. I couldn't breathe. I reached down, panic spreading through me like wildfire, and saw the crimson stains on my dress, thick and dark. My whole body shook as I whispered, "No, please hold on." I didn't know what to do. I had no doctor, no money, no phone, just a dirty shed, a torn-up coat, and a prayer that felt like it was made out of dust. But something inside me, instinct maybe, told me to be still. I laid there for hours, listening to my own heartbeat and the baby's, even if it was only in my imagination, talking to the life inside me like it was already a person. "You stay with me, all right? I'll get us through this. I swear it. You didn't ask for any of this, and neither did I, but I'm not letting this world take you too." At some point, I drifted off again. When I woke up, there was a blanket over me. Mrs. Carter. She must have come early that morning. She didn't wake me. She didn't ask questions. She just left me a thermos of warm tea, a jar of soup, and a pair of soft mittens, along with a note. "There's a bus heading out to Lexington tomorrow at dawn. Leaves from Main Street. I paid the fare. Just get on it." I clutched that note like it was a life raft. For the rest of the day, I stayed hidden. My body was weak, but my spirit was on fire. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of something I'd never truly felt before. Freedom. Not the kind you read about, not the kind people shout about on holidays, the kind that means no one owns you, the kind that means you get to wake up and decide who you are and where you'll go and who touches your skin. I knew I wasn't free yet, but I was close. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every rustle in the wind made my heart jump. I kept seeing Harold's face, the look in his eyes the last time he stared at me across that kitchen table, as if he already knew what he'd do, and I was the last one to figure it out. But by morning, I was ready. I wiped the dried blood from my legs, pulled my coat tight, walked slow to Main Street, with my head down and my hand on my belly. The sun hadn't risen yet. The whole town was quiet, like it was holding its breath for me. The bus was there. It was old, rusted in spots, but beautiful to me, like a chariot. I climbed the steps and handed the driver my slip. He didn't ask a thing, just nodded and waved me on. I sat in the back, pressed my forehead to the glass, and when the engine rumbled to life, I let the tears fall, silent, warm, years in the making. The wheels turned, the past shrank, and something new, something terrifying but mine, stretched out ahead. I didn't know where I was going exactly. I didn't know how I'd survive. But I knew this. I would never let that child inside me feel the kind of fear I'd lived in. I would build a new life. I would give them a name, a story, a love that cost nothing and belonged to no one but us. The pain had swallowed me whole, but I had chosen to spit it back out. That was the day I stopped being a victim and started being a mother. Lexington was bigger than anything I'd ever seen. The bus dropped me off just after sunrise. I stepped onto the pavement with nothing but a sack of clothes, a slip of paper with an address, and a baby growing inside me that I swore I'd protect with every breath I had. People moved fast in the city. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to be. I remember standing on the sidewalk, the sounds of honking horns and heels on concrete echoing in my ears like I'd landed on another planet. I walked slowly, following the directions Mrs. Carter had written. I asked one woman for help when I got turned around, and she barely glanced at me before hurrying off. I didn't blame her. I must have looked like a ghost. Pale, swollen, limping. But I found it. A squat brick building tucked between a shuttered hardware store and a diner. The windows were dusty, the steps cracked, but on the door was a small sign that read, Women's Refuge Center. Ring bell for assistance. I stared at that sign for a long time. My finger hovered over the bell like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My stomach flipped. I was terrified of being turned away, of someone asking too many questions, of being recognized, dragged back. But more than anything, I was scared they'd be kind to me. Because kindness makes you cry. Kindness makes the walls you've spent years building collapse in an instant. I rang the bell. A woman opened the door, middle-aged, kind eyes, silver-streaked hair pulled back into a bun. She looked me up and down, not in judgment but in assessment. She saw it all in one glance, the belly, the bruises, the fear. Without a word, she stepped aside and opened the door wider. And just like that, I was inside. The place smelled like cinnamon and soap. There were couches, soft blankets, a bookshelf full of dog-eared paperbacks, and women. Quiet, tired, beautiful women, some young, some older, sitting in corners, holding children, whispering soft prayers into the air. Her name was Marlene. She led me to a small room at the end of the hall. You can stay here, she said. No one's going to ask where you came from. No one's going to tell you what to do. I broke down, not loud, not messy. Just silent sobs that racked my chest as I collapsed onto the bed and covered my face. She sat beside me, didn't say a word, just rubbed small circles on my back until I fell asleep. That was the first real sleep I'd had in years. Over the next few days, I barely spoke. I kept to myself, ate in small bites, tried to make sense of the quiet. Marlene didn't push, but she checked on me, brought me tea, gave me clean clothes. She even found a pair of soft shoes that fit my swollen feet. One night, as I stared at the ceiling, I asked her, "Why do you do this?" She smiled. "Because someone once opened their door for me, too. And because girls like you deserve a second chance." Those words stuck with me. Girls like you. Not broken, not ruined, just deserving. It was the first time I started to believe that maybe I could be something more than what had been done to me. A few weeks passed. I started helping in the kitchen, folding laundry, reading to some of the younger kids. I met other women, each with stories that made mine feel both unique and familiar. We were all survivors, different paths, same scars. One afternoon, I felt a sharp jab in my belly. Not painful, just sudden. I gasped and placed my hand over the spot. Marlene looked at me. "First real kick?" I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "That baby's got spirit," she said, smiling. So did I. I just hadn't known it yet. From that moment on, something inside me changed. I began to plan, not just how to survive, but how to live. I asked Marlene about jobs. She said I could clean rooms at a nearby motel once the baby was born. She even knew a woman who ran a thrift shop and might need extra hands. I asked her about school. She told me about night classes, GED programs, literacy groups. It was like she had answers to questions I was too scared to ask. And slowly, day by day, I started seeing a future, not a fantasy, a real one. One with a roof that didn't come with bruises. One where my child could sleep without fear. One where I wasn't a possession, but a person. I wrote letters I never sent. To Daddy, to Harold, to Mama. I forgave none of them, but I let the hate go little by little. Because hate is a heavy thing to carry when you're trying to hold a baby, a job, and your own shattered heart all at once. It had been almost 2 months since I'd arrived at the shelter. My belly had grown round and firm. The baby moved often now. Not just little flutters, but full, determined rolls that made me catch my breath. It was like they were telling me, "I'm coming, Mama, ready or not." I had started to feel almost human again. I could go entire mornings without thinking of Harold, sometimes even whole afternoons without flinching at the sound of boots outside the door. But healing is never a straight line. One rainy Thursday, I was folding linens in the common room when Marlene came in, holding a piece of paper. Her face was pale, tight around the mouth. She handed me the note in silence. It was a flyer, a missing persons notice. My photo, a younger version, taken by the church for the annual directory. My hair was longer then, curled under at the ends. I looked softer, sadder. Just a girl trying to disappear. Missing. Ruth Ann Collins, age 16, maybe pregnant. Husband seeking information about her whereabouts. Contact Harold Cotter, Pine Hollow. The flyer was fresh, newly printed. It had found its way to shelters and bulletin boards across the region. They were looking for me. He was looking for me, and I knew what that meant. Not because he loved me, not because he missed me, but because he saw me as something he owned, and someone had stolen it. Marlene sat across from me. "We can't keep you hidden forever," she said gently, "but we can help you disappear again, the right way." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then leaned in. "There's a woman I know, works with a church network. They help girls like you. Vanish. New name, new state, a fresh start." It sounded impossible, a fantasy, and yet my heart jumped at the thought. "I don't want to run forever," I whispered. "You won't," she said, "but you have to finish the race before you rest." I spent that night holding my belly, whispering to the child inside, trying to imagine what a second life might feel like. One where I had a driver's license, a little apartment, a crib by the window, where I could call myself something, someone new. But just as the idea began to take root, the past came crashing through the door. It was 3 days later. We had just finished dinner, and I was clearing the table when I heard shouting outside. Male voices, angry, sharp, boots on concrete, someone pounding on the front door. I froze. Then I heard it. His voice, Harold, slurred and cruel, rising above the others. "I know she's in there. You think you can hide her? She's my wife. She's mine." My vision went black at the edges. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. Marlene grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back hallway. "Emergency plan," she whispered. "Come on." They had practiced for this, for women fleeing abusive homes. There was a second exit through the laundry room hidden by old cabinets. We slipped out the back into the alley just as another staff member answered the front door with practiced calm. Marlene shoved a bag into my hands. It was already packed. My clothes, my papers, my few keepsakes. She looked me in the eye and said, Go. Don't stop. Head for the station. Bus leaves in 20. The contact is waiting. You never saw me. You understand?" I nodded, tears flooding my eyes. "Thank you," I choked out. She didn't reply, just squeezed my hand hard and turned back toward the chaos. I ran, even pregnant, even terrified. I ran like the devil himself was on my heels. I didn't stop until I saw the bus. A man in a gray jacket stood beside it, checking names off a clipboard. When he saw me, he nodded once and ushered me on. There were no words exchanged, no confirmation needed. I collapsed into the last seat, clutching my belly, rocking slightly. I was leaving again. But this time, it wasn't just escape. It was erasure. The final straw wasn't the flyer. It wasn't even Harold screaming on the steps of the shelter. It was the moment I realized my baby might grow up being hunted, just like I had been. And that was something I would never allow. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of running. Because some places aren't homes. They're graves that forgot how to close. And I was finally ready to climb out. The bus pulled out of the Lexington station just after midnight. I sat alone in the very back row, heart pounding, one hand gripping the frayed canvas bag Marlene had packed for me, the other resting over the gentle curve of my stomach. Outside, the city lights blurred into golden streaks, and soon enough, even those were swallowed by the dark roads and empty fields that stretched between towns. With every mile, I felt the grip of Pine Hollow loosen, the shadow of Harold, the sting of Daddy's betrayal, the silence of Mama. Each turn of the wheels felt like a funeral for the girl I used to be, the girl who said, "Yes, sir," with tears in her throat and fear in her bones. I didn't know where I was going. Not really. I had a name. Clara Jane Abbott. It had been printed on a new birth certificate, a new identity created by a network of women who, like Marlene, refused to let predators own the story. They gave me a history, a paper trail, and most of all, a future. I held that name like a newborn, delicate, precious, terrifying. It was strange, knowing I could never say my real name again. That the only people who knew Ruth Ann had either tried to destroy her or buried her in shame. But I didn't mourn her. I carried her. She got me here. After 8 hours on the road, the bus hissed to a stop in a place I'd never heard of. Carver Springs, Indiana. A small town, quieter than Lexington, but bigger than Pine Hollow. It smelled like pine and chimney smoke and something sweet I couldn't place. There was a woman waiting for me. She wore a mustard-colored coat and glasses so thick you could barely see her eyes. She walked straight up to me, said, "You must be Clara," and slipped her arm around mine like we were old friends. Her name was Dot. She didn't waste time with questions, just took my bag, hailed a cab, and got us moving. She chatted on the way about the cold snap coming in, how her chickens had stopped laying eggs early this year, and how her niece had just had twins. I barely replied, but I didn't need to. Dot was a safe kind of noise, the kind that fills the air so you don't have to. Her house was small, white with blue shutters, and smelled like ginger and furniture polish. She had an upstairs bedroom ready for me, warm with thick blankets and a rocking chair already set by the window. "This'll be yours until we figure something longer term," she said. "You're not a guest. You're family now, and family doesn't ask for explanations." That night, I slept better than I ever had, not because I wasn't scared. I was, terrified. But the fear no longer had claws. It just hovered, like a memory fading at the edges. In the days that followed, Dot helped me settle in. She showed me where the market was, introduced me to a woman named Helen who ran a sewing business out of her living room and said she could use a hand with orders. We picked out baby clothes from a box of donations, soft little onesies and wool booties that made me cry in the back of the store. I never told them what I'd been through. They never asked. That's the beautiful thing about certain kinds of women. They recognize a broken soul and love it anyway without demanding it explain its cracks. Weeks passed. My belly grew. The baby kicked harder now, like they were dancing. Alive. Ready. I talked to them constantly. telling them about the future I was trying to make, the room we'd share, the names I was considering. Not once did I mention Harold, or Daddy, or Pine Hollow. That part of the story ended the moment I stepped off that bus. One morning, while Dot made tea, she said, "I've been thinking, when the baby comes, you'll need your own place. Not far, just a little rental. Helen's neighbor is moving to a nursing home. Might be perfect." She said it like she was offering a casserole, but I knew what she was really saying. You're ready. And I was. For the first time in my life, I felt steady. Still afraid, yes, still unsure, but anchored, rooted. And when the baby came, oh, how they came, I screamed and cried and thought I might die. But I didn't. I lived. And so did my daughter. She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, eyes like mine, lips that quivered when she yawned. I named her Grace, not because I felt graceful, but because I knew I had been given something I didn't deserve, something holy. She was the start of everything new. When I held her for the first time, I whispered the same promise I had made under that tree so long ago. You will never belong to anyone but yourself. The little rental house was smaller than Dot's, just 2 rooms and a kitchen no bigger than a closet. But it was mine. Ours. I painted the walls a soft yellow and put lace curtains in the windows. The floor creaked, the pipes groaned, and the roof leaked in the corner of the bedroom during storms. But every flaw in that house felt like freedom. I used to lie awake listening to the rain hit the tin roof and think, no one knows where I am, no one owns me anymore. Grace was colicky at first. She cried every night for hours, and I would walk her in circles, whispering stories into her tiny ears about oak trees and fireflies and faraway places where little girls were always safe. I sang her the same hymns my mama used to hum while doing laundry, only now the words felt like mine. Every morning I'd rise before the sun and rock her in the stillness, listening to her soft breathing. And every day I reminded myself, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. I started working for Helen part-time, sewing hems, patching worn-out clothes, hand-stitching initials into church dresses and school uniforms. I didn't say much to customers, but they were kind, quietly kind. The kind who say, "You look tired, hun," and slip a slice of peach cobbler into your bag when you leave. Helen paid in cash, no questions, just like Dot. I was careful, never used my real name, never gave away too much. I avoided cameras, paperwork, official anything. I learned how to disappear in plain sight, how to smile without revealing, how to be pleasant but forgettable. People liked me, but they didn't get close. That was the plan. Grace would have a normal life. She'd never know what it was like to be traded, to be touched without permission, to cry in silence. She'd grow up with clean sheets, warm food, and a mother who read to her at night. Not perfect, but present. When she was 3, she asked why we didn't have any pictures of family. I told her we were starting our own. When she was 5, she asked why we didn't go visit grandparents. I said, sometimes family isn't who you're born to. It's who you choose. And when she was 8, she asked why I cried every time I heard a baby cry in the grocery store. I told her I just had a soft heart. That part wasn't a lie. Dot stayed close. She became Grace's aunt in the way that only chosen family can. She brought over soup when Grace was sick, sat with her during her first fever, helped her with reading when I had to work late. And when Grace started school, Dot came with me to enroll her, just in case they asked for papers I didn't have. She always had an answer ready, a reason, a smile that smoothed every doubt. The years went by in a blur of scraped knees, peanut butter sandwiches, and bedtime stories. I told Grace tales about brave girls who ran through forests, who escaped towers, who saved themselves. I never told her that those stories were mine. I never told her what happened before she was born. Some nights, I thought about it. About sitting her down, showing her the tattered old notebook where I'd written everything. The pain, the blood, the names. But then I'd see her sleeping, arms around her stuffed rabbit, her face soft and peaceful, and I'd think, no, not yet, maybe never. Because she deserved a childhood unclouded by horror, a life not defined by trauma. I carried the weight so she wouldn't have to. I buried the truth in whispered prayers. Let her grow up without shadows. Let her be light. And she was. Oh, she was. Kindness saved me. Not the kind you read about in books or see in movies. No grand gestures, no tearful reunions. Just the quiet kind. The kind that arrives in the form of warm soup on a cold day. The kind that mends the hole in your coat without asking how it got there. The kind that sits beside you in silence when the weight of your own memories becomes too much to carry. That kind of kindness lived in Dot and Helen, and eventually in the friends I made at the local church, women who didn't need to know my story to love me. They just knew I was someone who'd seen pain, and instead of turning away from it, they stayed. They became my tribe, the ones who helped raise Grace, who babysat when I worked double shifts, who invited us to potlucks and left secondhand toys on my porch with notes that said, "Just thought she might like this." They made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I belonged somewhere. But trauma has long fingers. Even in safety, it can reach back and tap you on the shoulder. It happened in small ways. The first time a man raised his voice in the grocery store, my knees buckled. Grace thought I was having a dizzy spell. I nodded and smiled, but I spent the rest of the day in bed, trembling. Once, I saw a man who looked like Harold across the street. Same walk, same hat, same heavy shoulders. My heart stopped. My breath vanished. I clutched Grace's hand so tightly she cried out, but it wasn't him, just a stranger. Another time, when Grace was 6, she came home with a school project, a family tree. She asked about her grandfather. I told her he passed before she was born. It wasn't a lie, not really. Albert Collins may have still been breathing somewhere in Kentucky, but as far as I was concerned, he died the day he sold me. And then there were the nights, the dreams, the kind that yanked me awake at 2 a.m., sweating and gasping, visions of dark kitchens, locked doors, Harold's eyes, my mother's silence. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, whispering to myself, "You're safe. You're here. That place is gone." But it never really left. Even when the bruises faded, the fear lingered. Even as Grace grew taller, happier, whole, I still carried the ruins inside me. And yet, in the daylight, I kept moving. I watched Grace dance barefoot in the yard, braid dandelions into her hair, ask questions about the stars. I helped her with homework, sang her lullabies, taught her how to sew a button and fry eggs without burning the edges. She was everything I'd hoped for, kind, curious, strong. She didn't flinch when people raised their voices. She didn't know how to cower. She stood tall when boys teased her. She looked adults in the eye when she spoke. She was what I could have been if someone had protected me. And I protected her, fiercely, silently. When she asked why I never dated, I smiled and said, "I already have everything I need." She rolled her eyes, said I was being dramatic, but kissed me on the cheek anyway. Dot grew older, slower, but never stopped showing up. When Grace turned 10, Dot gave her a quilt she'd stitched herself. Each square was a different piece of fabric from a moment in our lives. Grace's baby dress, my first apron from Helen's shop, a scrap of the curtain from our first apartment. It was beautiful, full of history Grace didn't yet know. That night, Grace asked me, "What's this one from?" pointing to a deep maroon square near the center. I paused. That square came from the blanket Mrs. Carter left me in the shed all those years ago. "The woman who helped us once," I said softly. "She gave me warmth when I had none." Grace ran her fingers over it like it was made of gold. I didn't tell her the full story. Not yet. Some truths are too sharp for a child's hands. But one day, I knew I'd hand it all over. The quilt, the stories, the pain, not to burden her, but to remind her of the strength we come from, of the women who kept us alive, of the girl I once was and the woman I became. Grace grew up fast, too fast for my heart, but just in time for her dreams. By the time she was 15, she was already taller than me, with wild curls and a quiet confidence that made people listen when she spoke. She loved books, just like I had, only she got to read them curled up on the couch with Coco, not by candlelight in fear. She asked questions I never dared to ask, challenged teachers, defended her friends. She once stood up to a boy twice her size for making fun of a girl in class. When I asked what gave her the courage, she just shrugged and said, "You raised me, didn't you?" I cried that night. Not out loud, I never did, but quietly, behind the door, where she couldn't see, because I had spent so many years wondering if my silence had been a curse, if keeping the truth from her made me weak, if raising her inside a lie would one day backfire. But hearing those words, "You raised me," made me realize something I had never quite understood before. I hadn't raised her in silence. I had raised her in love. The past I never spoke about had shaped me, yes, but it didn't define her. She grew up with laughter, with boundaries, with safety. She knew what it meant to say no. She knew she had a voice, and that it mattered. When she turned 16, I gave her a locket. Inside, I placed a tiny slip of paper. It didn't say much, just a line I'd carried in my chest for years. "You are the first thing I ever chose for myself." She cried when she read it, hugged me so tight I thought my bones would break. That locket became her anchor. She wore it to exams, to her first dance, to the airport when she left for college. Yes, college. My little girl, the daughter of a girl who was bought and sold, became the first person in our family to attend university. She studied social work, said she wanted to help kids whose lives began rough. She didn't know, not yet, just how rough mine had been. And still, she made her own way, with her own light. She never needed to know everything to shine anyway. When she was 20, she brought home a boy. His name was Eli. He had kind eyes and awkward hands, and he treated her like she was something rare. I liked him instantly, which terrified me, because trusting men had never come easy. How could it? But Eli was different, patient, gentle, never looked at Grace like she was a thing to be possessed. He waited at dinner until everyone had been served. He brought me tulips, even though I never told him I liked flowers. One night, long after they had gone to bed, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea and whispered, "Please don't hurt her." I don't know who I was talking to. God, the wind, or maybe the version of myself that still lived in the shadows. When Grace graduated, I sat in the front row and clapped until my hands hurt. She wore a white dress and a cap too big for her curls, and I swear I saw my mother in her, not the broken version I remembered, but the one I imagined she might have been if the world had been softer. After the ceremony, Grace pulled me aside. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being the first thing you chose," she told me. I nodded. She reached into her purse and handed me a small box. Inside was a silver charm, shaped like a little oak tree. "I got this for you," she said, "because no matter how hard the wind blew, you never fell. You just kept growing." And that's when I knew. She didn't need to know every detail. She didn't need to hear about Harold or Elbert or the shed behind the store. She already knew the most important part, that we had survived, that love, even in silence, can still protect, that legacies don't always come from blood. Sometimes they're built from choosing to stay, to fight, to mother, when the world gave you every reason not to. I'm 86 years old now. My bones ache when it rains. My hands tremble when I pour my tea. The mirror shows me a woman with silver hair and creases carved by time. But inside, I still carry her. That 16-year-old girl, scared, shivering, bleeding in a stranger's shed, praying for a way out. And now, here I am, on this porch, wrapped in the same quilt Dot gave Grace years ago. I sit in this rocking chair and listen to the birds, watch the light filter through the trees. Sometimes I see shadows move, and for just a second I brace myself, expecting a voice, a hand, a memory to pull me back. But it never comes, because I'm not that girl anymore. And this world, this quiet life I've built, is mine. I've spent decades keeping my story locked away, not out of shame, but out of love. People say silence is weakness, that it's cowardice, but sometimes silence is protection. I didn't tell Grace because I wanted her to grow up free of it. I didn't want her to look at me and see a wound. I wanted her to see a mother, a woman who chose her, a woman who built something beautiful out of ruin. I was never given that kind of freedom, but I gave it to her. And now, as I sit here with my breath slower, my days quieter, I find myself wondering, should I have spoken sooner? Maybe. Maybe someone could have helped. Maybe I could have warned others. Maybe justice could have found Harold or my father. But justice is a strange thing. Sometimes it comes with sirens. Sometimes it never comes at all. And sometimes it looks like a woman sitting on a porch with a cup of tea, watching her granddaughter chase fireflies on a summer night. That's right. I have a granddaughter now. Grace had a little girl 2 years ago. Her name is June, and the first time I held her, my whole body shook. Not out of fear, but out of awe. She smiled at me, like she already knew everything, like she could see the entire story written in the lines on my face. And in that moment, I made another promise. This pain ends with me. June will grow up in light. She'll know she's loved. She'll never flinch when someone raises their voice. She'll never believe her body belongs to anyone but herself. And maybe, if I get brave enough, one day I'll tell her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. Enough for her to know that survival is messy and hard and often lonely, but it's still survival, and that makes it sacred. So if you're hearing this, if you're still listening to the words of a woman whose story was never meant to be told, please leave a comment. Tell me where you're from. I want to know if this truth is reaching beyond the walls of this little house. I want to know if there are others out there, women, girls, men even, who have carried their silence like I did, who are tired, who are scared, who are wondering if they'll ever be free. Let me be the one to say it. You can survive. You already are. And no one has the right to take that away from you. My name was Ruth Ann Collins. I was sold by my father when I was 16, and I lived.